welcome everybody. Today is going to be a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy, you get a lot out of this. Before we start, I want to do a quick poll. If I can find what I did with my poll. Here's my poll. And today's poll is, how often do you actually get dressed in real clothes since the pandemic started? Does anybody get dressed? Out of sweat. I'm not sweatpants. I'm talking real clothes.
Oh, real clothes.
Real clothes. What are those?
These sweatpants.
What if sweatpants are real clothes?
Not before.
That's right. That's right.
Before. Oh gosh.
Okay. Well, look, I'm glad. Hey, everybody.
Get dressed every day.
Everybody's laughing. That's a good thing. You're all smiling, and the endorphins are going, and it's increasing the dopamine. So keep it going. All right. Let's wait for a few more to answer the poll.
Thanks so
We
much.
still have some people who have not yet voted. I want to see everybody vote who's on. So if you're just joining us, please answer the poll. We want to know how many times you get dressed in real clothes, not sweatpants, not yoga pants and a t-shirt.
It's because we're all exercising every day. That's why we're living in our yoga pants.
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
You could also ask what shape the sweatpants are in,
That's-
and whether or not they were bought with you in mind.
oh, okay.
Ever enlarging shape.
Okay. Well, I think we can get started on the program now. Okay. Let me find my notes, and there I am. Okay. So who just joined? Okay. So I'm going to end the poll. We have 36 people out of 40. 90% of you have voted, and it looks like our winner is 1 to 2 times a week. So
That's what I did.
you're dragging yourself out of the house maybe, and not just to the market. Sometimes it just feels good to get dressed. It changes your whole attitude about things. And here we are, we're dressed at least from here up. So
Quite recently.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so we have 10 people who get dressed 1 to 2 times a week, and 8 people who get dressed every single day. Good for you.
No way. No way.
Oh, wait. Oh, come on. You feel bad. You get dressed, you put a little makeup on, even though nobody's going to see it. What amazes me, I go out with my mask and my sunglasses and a hat, and they still recognize me. I don't know how that happens. Anyway, welcome everybody. So we're going to be writing about ourselves a little bit today. If everything works okay, we're going to end up in breakout groups. We've had a lot of interest in writing over the years. When I was doing this group in person, we had a session on writing, which drew a bunch of people. I'm going to ask, let's mute everybody except me at the moment. And
Daddy, can you wake up Samantha?
oh, okay. I thought I muted everybody. Let's try this again. Mute all. Why is it not working? Okay. If you can all mute yourselves, for some reason, it is not muting everybody. Oh, here we go. That's why, because I was doing it wrong. Okay, so I was never a writer, which people find hard to believe, because when they read my blog, they say, well, you write so well. I hated writing. I grew up in the time when you had to write everything longhand and then turn it and then retype it on a typewriter. Remember those things? My kids would never have functioned in school without a computer. And my husband went to law school, and I was, and his friends were saying to me, why don't you go to law school? Because I would hang out with his friends. We weren't married at the time. I'd hang out with his friends at his dorm, and his law dorm at Michigan, and we'd be talking, about whatever they were doing. Well, why don't you go to law school? I said, I hate to write. So I didn't go to law school. I never wrote. So about 4 years after my diagnosis, the psychologist I was going to, and still going to, suggested that I write my story. He said, "Look, just write your story and you'll find out a lot about yourself." And I'm going, "Oh, I don't like to write. I hate to write." He says, "Just do it." He says, "Just start writing and, see what happens." So I started writing, and 3,100 words later, I finished, or sort of finished, and I sent it to him. I was shocked. I was just stream of consciousness, but I couldn't stop writing once I got started. And I really learned a lot about myself by going through this process. Now, I will tell you that no one has ever seen it except my psychologist. My husband has never seen it. My children have never seen it. Unless they find a way to break into my computer, they will never see it because it was very personal what I wrote. But that's my first experience with writing. And about that time, people started calling me. I was getting phone calls, and some of you were in this group who were amongst those who called me, saying, my cousin, my husband, my coworker was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Now, I hadn't even come out. I hadn't told the public I had Parkinson's, but obviously people knew. And they were having people call me to talk to them. So I'd meet them for coffee when we could meet for coffee. And we'd talk for about an hour, hour and a half, and then, follow through. And after a while, I thought, you know what? I'm going to write all this out. What I'm telling all these people. This was 12 years ago. Now, there were not a lot of blogs out there. There was basically nothing for the newly diagnosed, except me in Los Angeles. And people were getting in touch with me. And I thought, well, let's just write something out and I'll send it out, an email out. And I thought, well, I'll just put it on WordPress because I had done a travel blog when I was doing a lot of travel with my husband when he was traveling for work. So we were putting photos and things up, but it wasn't really a blog like this. So I started writing it and I started getting a good response. And the more I wrote, the better the response was. And I just kept it up. And I'm still writing 6 years later, and it's become my main form of expression. And it becomes cathartic. It really does. So that's basically, my story about how I got started writing. I did not start, when I got diagnosed. And like many of you, I was diagnosed, given a prescription and a return appointment and nothing else. Had I been told to write something at that time, it would have looked very different than what it did 4 years later. I switched doctors after about 6 months because the first one was horrible. But anyway, so I'm going to have my wonderful tech person, Eli, share the screen. Eli, can you bring it up? Thank you. And we're going to start about writing your narrative. And whatever you write, I want to emphasize, is not static, because your story is always evolving. And you're going to add to your story. So next slide. Let's do the next slide. Okay. So here, the benefits of writing are it often clarifies your wants and needs. It will help you take control of your situation, and it can reduce frustration, stress, and anxiety. That's just a few of them. I don't know why it's not showing the whole screen. That's really weird. Okay. So the benefits are you'll look at yourself differently. You'll find out things about yourself that you had not thought about. And you'll start seeing where your Parkinson started. It can be a really interesting process. And I don't know what happened to the bottom. Is there something below that on the slide, Eli? Okay, so the benefit, so as I said, often clarifies your wants and needs. It provides a type of healing that drugs don't. Okay, drugs are not everything. And your story will evolve as your life does. So next slide. So what I suggest and what I did, and this is actually, I got this from an article in Hope for Women magazine by Janie Sigelko. And she says these are her tips for writing your narrative. Write quickly, Write with purpose, write privately, and write without rules. In other words, just start writing. I write stream of consciousness. That's how I started. It's just stream of consciousness. You can come back and you can clean it up later and make any changes you want. Grammar and technicality do not matter when you are writing to heal. You don't have to show it to anyone. As I said, I shared mine with one person. There is no grade on this. You should commit to writing regularly to get the benefits of writing, whether it's writing something at night, before you go to bed, when you wake up, or set a time for writing. I don't do that, but if you have problems writing, that would be the best suggestion. And you can use the writing as this is a springboard to journaling. Now, I tried journaling. It's not my thing. Some people do, some people don't. It just depends on your personality, whether you wanted to start journaling. And it is your story. You own it. Okay, next slide. I was asked about a year ago, this is the last time I left my house pre-COVID. I went to Fresno to speak to their symposium there, and they asked me to talk about advocacy. And I talked about writing your story and using it for advocacy, because you will use this story in many different ways to advocate for yourself, with your doctor, your family, and your friends. If you know your story, you can articulate it. If you write it down, it gives you, when you go to the doctor, you can say, look, I have these issues, this is what I need. And it really helps you to advocate for yourself. And go back to it from time to time. Make changes as things change. Now, for some reason, we're cut off at the bottom again. It says your narrative and something. I don't know what's supposed to be there. Okay, let's just go to the next slide. I don't know what happened. Okay, so what I do when I write is I start with an idea, a concept. Something will hit me by something I read, something that I think of at 3 in the morning, wakes me up. You never know where ideas are going to come from. Maybe something somebody said. You start with that idea, and then I just start writing on my computer. This is how I write my blog. But when you're writing your narrative, it may be a totally different thing. But when I write my blog, I look for quotes or relevant illustrations after I write the whole thing. Then I start looking for something to put in there. And then I revise and revise and revise and revise and keep going until it looks good to me. I take a break, I come back and reread it. And if it still looks good, then I will publish it. There are a whole bunch of them on my computer that never got published because I came back to them and went, huh? So you just don't know where your writing's going to take you. But that's how I write the blog. For you, you may find that you enjoy writing, you enjoy sharing your writing with other people, and you want to do a blog, which will be, which is great. When I started my blog, there were only, when I was diagnosed, I could only find 2 other blogs. And one of them is still sort of going, the other one I think disappeared. And now there are, at last count, somebody put a list of them. There were over 150 people blogging about their experience with Parkinson's. Some are good, some are bad. Some of them are just people just writing their narrative, which is fine. You can write whatever you want if you have a blog. I like to do things that are of interest to me, write about things that are of interest to me. Whatever physical ailments I'm having because of Parkinson's, whatever, sky's the limit. I like, especially women's issues, I like to write about. So next slide. And so a few months ago, I was asked by the Parkinson's Foundation to write my narrative. They put people's stories up on their website. So this is the beginning of mine. You can see where I put, I started with back in 2007, I noticed my right foot would twitch occasionally when I was writing. I would literally shake it off by shaking my hand and foot Seriously, that's what I did. I would be writing and my foot would be twitching. And it would disappear and then show up again and again after a few weeks. This went on for a while, but I just ignored it. May sound familiar to you. Several months later, I fell and broke the tibia on my left leg. The twitch came back on my right foot, prompting a trip to my doctor. So this is my story. I added in some photos because they asked me for photos, and it keeps, there's more to this than that. And you're welcome to go to the Parkinson's Foundation site and just do a search, put my name in, and you'll find it. And it's an example of how you can write your story. And I started with what were the first symptoms I noticed. You may start with when I went to the doctor and I heard those three awful words, you have Parkinson's. You can start your story anywhere. Okay, next slide. So we're going to have two wonderful speakers. The first one is Carol Clupny. The second is Linda K. Olson. Linda spoke to us a few months ago. And I'm going to just wing it on your bios because there's a lot here. Carol wrote a book called The Ribbon of Road Ahead, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. It's a memoir about mainly two things in her life. One was riding a tandem bicycle with her husband across Iowa in the Ragbri race, and she will talk to you about that. And the other was hiking the Camino in Western Spain. And we were there a couple of years ago on a bus tour, and we saw all those hikers. And I give you a lot of credit. I could not have done that. Pretty amazing what she did. So she's going to talk, anyway, she was eventually ended up writing a book about these two-part stories, which are very important in her life with Parkinson's. And then Linda will speak after that. Linda spoke to us a few months ago. As I said, she is a triple amputee who was recently diagnosed with Parkinson's. So her take on all of this is totally different. She just published a memoir, but it's really her story from becoming an amputee, what happened with her accident to today. So she's going to speak to us. And then when Linda is finished, we're going to go into breakout rooms. And each of us will be leading one of the breakout rooms where you'll get a chance to get started on writing your own narrative. So,
Altria Books presents The Ribbon of Road Ahead, One Woman's Remarkable Journey with Parkinson's Disease, written and narrated by Carol Clupny.
Okay.
Next slide.
There I am. Everybody has a story. And for this purpose, let's say that the story is your whole life. A narrative for our purpose today is like an event in your life. So the story stays the same. It's your life. The narrative comes up somewhere in your story, and it can be shifted or moved around or added to or built upon. I like to use the word story rather than narrative, so I'm going to use that. Let's see what's on the next slide. Oh, yep. Okay. My story or my narrative today is how I grew into accepting my Parkinson's through writing. Notice how I said I grew as a metaphor for acceptance. So once upon a time, long time ago, I had some weird symptoms. I had some frozen shoulder, some intestinal difficulties, anxiety up the yin yang, inner tremors, twitching fingers. And after that, all those little symptoms came a big diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Let's see what's on the next picture. You're seeing the studio here. Well, I thought about my diagnosis. Isn't this just something, what do I need to do to grow out of the disease? Well, you know what? It was kind of a shock to me that I wasn't going to grow out of the disease, that I was going to have to live with it, because we have a disease that we know is a progressive neurological disorder for which there is not yet a cure. So after I was diagnosed, I sat around a lot in my recliner and I watched my busy world go by without me. And I got really anxious and really frustrated and really angry. So one day I stood up and went outside. And at that point in time, I was at a risk for a lot of falling. But I walked out to my mailbox and back into the house, up the stairs, and made it, didn't fall. So the next day, I decided to go a little further. Got up out of my chair, went outside, crossed the street, didn't get hit by a car, came back, made it. Then the next day, I walked down the street to the corner, came back, got in the house. It was not a problem. The next summer, I found myself walking the 500-mile Camino de Santiago in Spain. It's a pilgrimage route. If you guys remember, if anybody has seen the movie The Way, it kind of got it going for the United States people. So walking the 500 miles just wasn't enough for me. I wanted to walk 1,000 miles. So I returned to the Camino 3 more times so I could get 1,000 miles under my feet. Along the same period of time, I read an article that bicycling helped mitigate the symptoms of Parkinson's. So I dug out this old dusty bicycle in my garage and took it out for a ride, and I got hooked. So a year later, I found myself in Iowa riding with my husband on a team for pedaling for Parkinson's with Dr. J. Alberts. Hot. It was the end of July. Humidity was just out of this world. Hills. Iowa is not flat, Sharon.
Flatter than the Alps.
Yeah. We started on the west side of the state with our back tire in the Missouri River, and we rode across the state of Iowa until we got to the other end where the front tire went in the Mississippi River. The rides are different every year, but they're around 450 miles. Takes us a week to do it. Ride during the day, camp out at night. So you can imagine there's lots of adventures that I had on these trips, lots of stories to be told. So I started writing a little bit, and primarily I wrote using social media. I had a blog going for a little while. I wrote letters to my friends, and they started pressuring me. They said, Carol, you have to publish these stories. There are more people who need to hear them. And I just went, oh my goodness. So enough pressure was put upon me that I broke down and I promised to look into it. So who do you even ask? How do you start writing? I mean, you know, I didn't even know where to start. So I thought of an acquaintance I had when I grew up in Walla Walla, Washington. And she now owns a bookstore in Portland, Oregon, which is 3 hours from me. She recommended a company called Indigo Editing and more. So this business takes the writer from a developmental stage up to the point of publishing, but they don't publish. Let's see what the next picture is, Eli. Okay, so this is Allie, and she is the chief editor. She's on the left, I'm on the right. She's the chief editor of Indigo Editing. So in this system that they have set up, they had a menu, and you could pick and choose what you wanted them to do as far as your publication of your book and what I could do. There's things like getting the ISBN number, getting registered at the Library of Congress, copyright, making accounts for all your printing agencies or whoever you're working with. I had to get registered in the state of Oregon as a business. Finding people to write the little blurbs, the nice little notes that attract people to your book that are on the cover. So there are lots of things to do. So I was starting to work on this when I went kind of downhill with my health. My doctor referred me for a DBS evaluation, and in 2016 that was completed, and it made a huge difference for my life. I got some samples together of my writing to send into Indigo Editing, and Allie, the editor, I'll call her Allie, the editor. She read them and she wrote back that I think you have a story to tell, Carol. But my story was just all this bunch of stuff, you know, little pieces here and there. And I put those together as best as I could for my first manuscript. Allie called it a reader's edit. She read through it, found what she thought were the interesting stories, and set me off to write again. So I wrote a second manuscript. And because her developmental editing was so great, she really got me going. It was much better, much improved writing. Just as a birdwalk, something I learned about the editing process is Allie would look through all the places, all the locations, all the people, all the names of towns, and make sure that they were accurate. And I didn't know that that was something an editor did. I got a whole page of things to make sure that they were correct. It was very fascinating. So I started on from my third go around, and for my third go around for a manuscript, I completely revamped the book. I took the events or the narratives and put them in different places, and I started the book out completely differently than I had. Got it back to her, and she was really surprised and really pleased. And so it took me 3 manuscripts to get to the final copy. She and 2 of her junior editors went through it with me for the last time before we published it. Indigo Editing did the interior design for me, and they did the cover design, but I was able to get that book together and upload it to Ingram Spark, who is my printer, and this is my book. I sent away for 1 book to begin with. This came back, and this is the actual first book that was printed, and it's gotten rather dog-eared, and it travels with me everywhere. This is the one I read out of all the time. So I ordered 400 books, and they arrived at my house 2 weeks later in a FedEx truck in 2 feet of snow. And we had to get them up to the house. Luckily, my husband was here, but it was quite a funny thing to watch. I was able to sell those books off within 3 months from my home. And so I ordered 500 more, and I still have a few left if anybody wants to buy some. But so it's a big responsibility having to sell the book yourself. And I know there are people in foreign lands, they've had to use like Amazon or some other agency to get the book because they can't get it for me because the postage is just too inhibitive. But I know that there's people in France and Germany and Italy and the UK and South Africa and Australia. But this could be a whole story by itself, so I've got to move on. Every time I went to talk about my book, people would say, "Where is your audiobook?" And I said, "Well, I'll have one soon. It'll be coming out soon." I hadn't planned really on doing an audiobook. So when I got home from one of my trips, I started looking into it, and I saw all the things that it would take to do it. And oh my goodness, it was going to be expensive. I would have to hire studio time, a professional voice narrator to read the book. And that just wasn't going to happen. Well, magic does happen sometimes. And it just happened that Allie at Indigo Editing decided to open another branch of her business for audiobooks, creating audiobooks. So I called her up, and she ran up the cost for me of what that would be like to have that done. And I just couldn't see where I was going to be able to do it. So I said, "Can't do it now, Allie." And Allie said, "Well, have you considered narrating your own book? That will save you a lot of money." And I'm going, "Allie, I have Parkinson's disease. I can't read out loud more than a paragraph, much less sit in a studio and read for hours at a time." So Allie said, "You know, Carol, I'm going to go out on family leave for 3 months. Why don't you just think about this and see what you can do?" Well, okay. I'm a former speech pathologist. I was practicing speech pathology for 32 years. So I knew how to do some things with my voice. I practiced breathing, expanded my lung capacity. I worked really hard on sustaining my vocalizations. But the thing that was the most difficult for me, believe it or not, was pronouncing sounds and words. Whenever I got into a multisyllabic word, I would get stuck on it. And sounds like the P and the B sound, if they were in a word, I couldn't say that word. It was just really odd. So I helped myself. I got this old book. It was published in 1945, and it's a speech drill book. And I practiced and practiced and practiced. And I read to my husband while we traveled. I read to my husband when we were at home. So 3 months came by, and Allie called and listened to my voice. And she was just thrilled at the quality of my voice and how it had changed. So she booked me some studio time. This was the end of November. This book took me 22 hours to read into to be recorded. They was blocked off into 2-hour studio sessions for 11 days. And my voice held out. I was so pleased. I did have some gravelly times with my voice, but you know what? It's good. When I was looking into how to publish audiobooks, I looked into one to see which ones of our Parkinson's authors had narrated their own stories. And all I could find was Michael J. Fox and Tim Hague. And I said, why is this? Why aren't we doing more of our own books? There's lots of Parkinson's books out there, but they're narrated by professional voices or other voices. So that's kind of my thing now. I'm talking about, let's see if we can get our voices tuned up a little better and be doing some of our own narration. I can't even describe the feeling of accomplishment that I had, first off, with just finishing this book, but when I read the last chapter of it for the recording in December. Just last Thursday, it came to me as a proof, and I'm proofing it now, listening to it again, and so it can go out on the market pretty soon. And while I'm doing this, I'm reliving all my lessons that I learned with Parkinson's. I'm really just thrilled that I was able to do this book and to teach myself to write and then how to read. Okay. Let's see what's in the next.
Yeah, there's one more slide, I think.
Okay.
No, 2 more. Okay.
2 more. Okay, so here's me recording. I was reading off this tablet into this big microphone system, and I was in this room all by myself. It was just kind of weird, but after a while, I got used to hearing my own voice. So, okay. Well, everyone has a story to tell, and I challenge you to write your stories. Sharon gave some ideas earlier about how you could get started, but you could write in even one of those mother's or grandmother's journals or that diaries that you write to your grandchild, or in your own journal, breaking your story up into pieces and more of a blog-like thing, or even make an audiobook, So telling my story has really helped me grow into this disease. Writing it down further has helped me to feel okay in my Parkinson's skin.
I think there's one more picture.
Okay.
Yeah. One more slide. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, there's a picture of one of my manuscripts. Yeah, this must have been my second one because my story ended up starting out a whole different than this.
Yeah, I screwed up. Okay.
When I talk, I'm just about done here. When I talk about my story, and you'll see this in my book, I didn't do a big battle. I'm not like one of those PD warriors. But I do drag Parkinson's along with me. We're attached by the brain, so I can't get away from it. And sometimes the Parkinson's tries to sabotage me and keep me from doing what I want to do. When I got to the point when I was okay telling my story, I was swept off my feet in a flurry of activities, which I'm involved in a lot of stuff too. When you get to your point of telling your story, you start reaching out. You could be writing or mentoring or facilitating a group, or even going down to the local Lions Club at lunch and giving them a little talk about Parkinson's. That's when you come into acceptance. Okay. So everyone has a story, and I hope that you will write yours. Eli, one more slide and closing credits. Oops. Do we have one more audio?
You should.
This has been The Ribbon of Road Ahead, One Woman's Remarkable Journey with Parkinson's Disease, written by Carol Clupny and narrated by the author. Editing and post-production by Ali Shaw, Indigo Editing, Design, and more. Production copyright 2021 by Altria Books. All rights reserved.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Okay. And Linda, let's unmute you. And Linda's going to go ahead and tell her story about writing.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
That's like the cell phone. You hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
That's the most used phrase on Zoom for the year 2020 was the most used phrase anywhere. Okay.
Well,
go ahead.
This is an interesting act to follow with Carol because I think she wrote a fabulous book. And when Sharon asked me to do this, I thought, my book is not about Parkinson's disease. It's about my life as an amputee. But the more I thought about it, we have so many parallels and so many things that are very, very similar, even though we were writing about a different part of our life. We're all in the same place now. So I had no intentions of writing a book. I was injured when I was 29. So I've been an amputee now for 41 years. And for at least the last 30 years, you got to write a book, you got to write a book. And I thought, no, I don't need to write a book. I have nothing to write about. We just have a normal life. And I truly believed that. Until my daughter was 30, she took off and decided she wanted to take an online class at UCLA. Now, my daughter lives up in Davis, and she was an art major and English major in college. And for some reason, she just thought she'd like to take this class. And one of her projects was to write, I guess they had a lot of things to write, but she wrote a story about me. And when she gave it to me to read, I was blown away. And I went home that evening and I said, Dave, my husband, I said, Tiffany has just written a fabulous story and it's about me and my disability and her having never known, my children were born after the accident, so they'd never known a mom with arms and legs. And she writes about that. And I said, I think it's time, maybe it's time for us to start thinking about this. Well, I had retired a couple of years before that. No, I hadn't. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And I thought, maybe I can just start writing stories, but still no intent of writing a book. But I'll learn how to write. Now, I had been a radiologist for 30 years, and I don't know, my teaching of how I taught the residents at UCSD was the perfect radiology report was 3 sentences. Comparison to what study that you had just looked at, whether it was normal or not, and then a conclusion. So they would get a teaching award from me if they could make a report that was that brief, because radiologists are known. In fact, it used to be said that the radiologist national flower was the hedge, because we would write reports that were pages long. You get to the end and we'd describe everything there was, and there'd be no conclusion that you could do anything with. So I ended up being the head of breast imaging for many years, and we had a system for reporting that was very, very concise. In fact, it ended up being category 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which you're all familiar with. So my experience with writing was terse, very few words. So as I started writing, I thought, well, I'll get online. I got online at UCLA and I took a writing memoir class, which was very interesting because the people that were writing, it was live. So we would be on the computer. This was way before COVID. And we would write and we'd have to read out loud what we were writing. And then it would be critiqued. Well, you have to have a thick skin to start this process because they don't pull any punches with you. And that's the way it should be, because if they don't, you're never going to learn anything. So I went through maybe 3 or 4 classes at UCLA. Then I started getting brave and thought, well, maybe I'll go to UCSD because I only live a mile from campus. And I thought maybe I'll go to an evening class and I'll go be there in person, which means I have to actually write in class. I was intimidated by this whole process. And my experience of writing in class from 6:30 till 9:30 at night was tiring because it was late for me. I thought that was late. But I started meeting people, and the women or the professors that were teaching us became the mentors that here in our community in San Diego were part of the writing community. And the people that were in our class became people that we're still in touch with. So the process of going from online to in class and then moving on to writing critique groups. So I had 2 groups that I would go to. One of that I went to for probably 4 years. I would go every other week and I would take a story. I was still not writing a book. I was writing stories. I picked things that made me feel good. I took the opportunity to write about our first camping trip with our children. I wrote about how I had my car adapted. So when it finally dawned on me that maybe I should be writing a book, I realized I didn't have a book, I had stories. And at that point, I was advised to get a developmental editor, which I did. Her name is Kristen Iris, and I wish I had put it on a slide for you. Eli, let's see what the next slide is. Well, that's just a picture of my book. When I met with when I met with Kristen, only once, the rest of it's all been done virtually, and this has been over the last 2 years, I think. She read my manuscript and she looked at me and she said, "This is a love story." And I said, "Thank you, dear Lord. That's what I've been trying to tell people." Because everybody that had been reading what I was writing said, "Oh, this is just about you being a disabled person and you're inspirational." I said, "No, no, no, this is about us. This is my journey with my husband and how we've done this together." So I made a contract with her and she did a wonderful job of taking my stories, tying them together. And it was a simple trick she taught me. She said, when you come to the end of a chapter, you need to have one paragraph that doesn't really tie it all up, but leaves a question so that you want to go to the next chapter, so that the chapters have, there's an arc to your story. I realized that I had not written an autobiography. What I'd really written was just episodes of what we all do take for normal or take for granted in our everyday life. Um, Having a job, having children, going on vacation, driving. And then I put them in the perspective of how I did them or adapted to them as a disabled person. So that's how my book came together. Now, how it relates to Parkinson's. I started writing my stories about 3 years before I was diagnosed. So I've been diagnosed now 6 years ago. And I have the same kind of story that we all have. And that is none of us really, I suspect, came on this, all of a sudden we've got a problem. When you look back, there were all these little tiny things. I couldn't write. I was called, my husband, I was up in the mountains. I've been up there for a week by myself. And I said, "Dave, there's something wrong with me." I said, "I can't write. It's like I'm pushing through molasses." And all the things started coming together. And I thought, maybe there's a reason now for me to write this book. And to be honest with you, what pushed me more than anything else was my connection with Parkinson's, because it now became clear to me that I had a message. And that's one of the 2 things that I would really emphasize is when I started, I didn't have an audience in mind. I was just writing stories. The people that worked with me said, "Linda, you have to decide who you're going to be writing to. Who do you want to buy your book?" And I said, "Well, amputees." Well, I said, "Well, that's a really small group of people." I said, "Well, what I'd really like," this made a big difference. I said, "What I really want is people who have a disability to know that they can have a family." And it kind of kept morphing and getting a little bit bigger. I want parents or disabled parents to know that it's not just what happened. Most of the books that are written about trauma and bad things are within the first 3 or 4 years. I said, I've got 40 years behind. Well, now I've got 40 years behind me. I've got the proof that what we're saying works. So Parkinson's was what gave me the impetus, because all of a sudden, and if you've heard me talk, I will get up on stage and Dave will help me walk up there. And I start by saying, as Parkinson's people, we have the same problem with looking funny. Our hand doesn't work right. We don't move well, but we can still go out and have a good time. And that became my second message, was to get out and go. And it was kind of an, if I can do it, you can do it. So I, as I started getting towards the realization that this was really going to be a book, I felt better about it because I knew who I wanted to talk to. And I really had a message, and it was to get out and go. Because, and that's what we all deal with Parkinson's, is we're getting more and more restricted with our movements and things. And I thought, if I can show people that they can laugh at themselves, they can make fun of themselves, and just whatever it takes to go out and have a good time. So at that point, I thought, okay, we're going to have a book. So I got to the point where it was now getting close to needing a literary agent, but we weren't quite done. I went back and I looked at the story that my daughter had written, and I said, that's got to be the beginning of my book. Because even though it tells you that we had an accident, it sets the stage as a 30-year-old who says, when she wrote this, she said, I'm now 3 months older than my mom when she had this accident. And I am awed by what she did. So that gave us the start. And then I thought, well, I have 2 children. Well, I got to have something that my son wrote. And I went through the files of stuff I had on him, and I found his personal statement for his application to medical school. He wrote this when he was probably 27. He took some time off after college. And he had written the most moving statement about what he had learned from his parents and what his dad had taught him, that a person is not just their body parts, it's their soul. And this is what he was putting on his medical school application. And I thought, this is the end of the book. This is him inadvertently telling what he had learned from his parents and why it was okay to have a family after you had become disabled. But the icing on the cake became my husband's part of the book. In the last year of putting the book together and working with the developmental editor, I would show Dave a chapter, or I'd ask him, does this sound right? Is the information correct? And he would go sit on the couch with my manuscript, the pages that I've given him, and pretty soon the tears would be coming down his cheeks. And I would just like, Dave, don't cry. This is supposed to be a happy book. He says, it just makes, every time I read this, it makes me cry. When he would get done, he would go over to his computer and he would sit down for 3 or 4 hours and he would type nonstop. And he wrote things that were his visceral, gut-wrenching reaction to what he had just read. And my husband and I are so different, because I'm happy-go-lucky, lackadaisical, and I'm making everything sound like it was funny and easy. And when you read what he wrote, he makes you just go, oh my God. I mean, and I learned something that in 39 years I'd never heard him say. He would go out that year after the accident. He's a runner. He would go out at 4:30 in the morning and he would run out this trail and he would scream and yell and cry. And when I read what he wrote, I said, Dave, you never told me this. I said, well, this is just what I had to do to keep going. Those became 4 short pieces interspersed in my book. So my book starts with my daughter as a prologue, my son as an epilogue, and 4 short pieces that my husband wrote in the middle. And it's what made the book, I think, come to life, because it made the statement that here's this family from the beginning to the end. There's no discussion of Parkinson's in it, but it's met with a interesting reception. And I think part of that is because of COVID. It just was published in October. And I'm convinced that we're all looking for something now that makes us feel like we can move on or we can do things. And like Carol with her, but when you read Carol's book, I just look at that and I think, how, first of all, very few people make that walk the 500 miles. But as she describes being stiff and in pain, I'm thinking, I understand that now. It's an incredible journey. So we wrote very different books from very different parts of our lives, but a fascinating just to see them come together in this fashion. Now, I ended up, again, because I'm not a famous person and I don't have a following, I was not going to be published by a mainstream publisher. Carol went through self-publishing. I took the middle of the road approach, I had a literary agent who introduced me to She Writes Press, which is a hybrid publishing company. And the hybrid publishing companies provide a lot of the things that a normal mainstream publishing company would do, but you pay for them. So as they started, they were kind of looked down upon because people said, well, you paid to have your book done. Well, no, I didn't pay to have my book written. I paid to have my book produced. And big advantages of having that done, Brooke Warner, let's see what the next picture is. I think this is the one that I want. Yes, wrote a book called Greenlight Your Book recently. And this, I would suggest if you're serious about wanting to publish, that you might want to take a look at this because it will give you some guidance as to which of these paths. Most of us aren't going to get into mainstream publishing, but this will give you an option to look at. But she provided the title to my book because I had my working title had always been I Didn't Marry Your Arms and Your Legs, which was what my husband said to me when he saw me the first time. Everybody said, well, that's not a title. And she came up with the title Gone. She said, because I reread your chapter, the first chapter, twice, and you kept looking down and you kept saying they were gone. She said, gone. And I thought, my God, I would never have thought of a title of Gone because that's what happened. It was gone. And then the other big advantage they gave us was they do the cover illustration. And it doesn't matter what we bring to them. I had a picture that I had always thought, oh, this will be my great picture for the book. They said, you don't understand. Pictures, or your book cover has to be the size of a thumbnail. Think of what you see on Amazon when you get on there to look at a book. It's that big. So if it's a busy picture or a photograph, it doesn't show well. So the cover ends up being drawn by my daughter, and this is my legs when I don't have them on, and we prop them. There's a picture in the book that will show them like this. So the things that the hybrid publishing company did for me, I thought were what really brought my book together and made it become what I would never have been able to do on my own. So let me see what else I wanted to tell you about this. Title, cover, I wrote a little notes to myself here. Let me see what I think I only have one more slide. Oh, and just as Carol said, all of my stories, when I would go to my writing group every other week, everybody would get a group. The way a writing group works, the way I was taught and the way, and this is classic, is you take your piece and you read it, and then you have to sit there with your mouth shut and go around the group, and they all have a copy of your story or your chapter or whatever, and they critique it. And my writing group they were rude. All of them were published authors, not famous books, but they'd all written memoirs and stuff like that. And I would write all over. They write on their manuscript and hand it back to me, and I wrote on my manuscript. And when it comes all the way around the circle, then I'm finally allowed to talk. You can't defend yourself. You just have to sit and listen, which was the best learning tool I ever could have had because I didn't find myself in this but I had to sit there and listen, and that's how I learned to write. So I went from teaching residents to make 3-sentence radiology reports to being able to put descriptions in, put conversation in, and make things have a storyline to them. So that's where my book writing came from, and it's been a fascinating process. And I thought I didn't have anything to say to people, but I guess more people thought that I had something than I really believed in. So I'm glad it's done. I think I'm a one-book person. I don't think I have anything else in me. And I'm going to let all of you do all the Parkinson's writing because that's your turn. And I'm going to just read them. So, but anyway, so that's my story for writing a book. Thank you for letting me do this. This was fun.
Good. We'll do your other slide after the breakouts. We're going to go into breakout rooms in 1 second. I just want to give you some brief instructions. Eli, you can turn that off. So when you're writing, remember the KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Just keep writing and writing and writing and then revise. Don't make it complicated. So when you write your story, you may want to keep a couple things in mind. What did you first notice first and when? What prompted you to see a doctor? How many doctors did you see and how long did you get your diagnosis? How did you feel? Think about these things. So we're going to go into breakout groups, and each of our speakers and a couple of other people are going to be leading the breakout groups. And you're going to have a chance to write a couple sentences just to get started on your own journey for writing, whether it's for yourself, for a blog, for a book, whatever it may be. And then we'll all come back together and wrap up. So we're going to go a little after 11 this morning. So I know a number of you are leaving now because it's very close to 11, but for those of you, if you can stay on, we'd love to have you stay and do a little writing. We have a couple more slides, but as I wrap this up, this morning I had a thought that if you want to continue writing, if you want to write your story and share it with us, you can send it to me and we will see if we can do something about sharing our stories, whether it's within the group or a bigger group, however we want to do it. But let's see what people come up, what everybody comes up with. So you can, nothing too long. It doesn't have to be real long. It can be 500 words. It can be 1,000 words. It doesn't have to be 50, 100 like I did. And we'll see what we can do. It might be fun, from a women's point of view.
Just before we leave, I think many of you have been to the WPC meetings that happen every 3 years because of the pandemic. The uncertainty as to whether Barcelona would or wouldn't happen. The WPC is going to have a virtual meeting, which will be in May 17. They have a fabulous, fabulous course lined up. And this will be a $25 registration fee, and it will go all week. It'll be pre-recorded, so you can binge watch it if you like. It will be just like having gone to WPC. And hopefully they are beginning to think that Barcelona may actually happen. So put this on your calendar and take a part of this, and let's hope that Barcelona happens. So yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Next slide. So our virtual tiara, thank you, Carol and Linda, for your wonderful presentations. And thank you, Christy and Lauren, for assisting with the breakout rooms. Next slide. So in 2 weeks, we're going to have Mandy Shintani from Urban Polling for Parkinson's. That should be a lot of fun. We will be doing some exercises. And then 2 weeks later, Dr. Sonia Mather will be speaking. She writes a blog called The Unshakable MD. I'm not sure what her talk is going to be about at this point. She was diagnosed at 27. She was a young doctor, just graduated medical school, had 2 young children, and eventually had to stop practicing medicine. So she will be talking, I believe, about her story. And after that, I don't know. I will get the video and a summary, any information that you need, where to find Carol and Linda's books, etc., to you probably in the next 2 or 3 days. And with that, just have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much.